And so I have a prototype of resource actually that is using async iterable under the hood instead of promise to be able to get multiple values back.
So Alex, would the resource, because you were talking with us just recently about this new resource, which to me, I kind of look at it as like an adapter, right?
If signals are, if observables are in the browser,
like would that, well,
our
he's
resource
talking
loader
about
would
types.
happily take an observable.
Yeah. So is that helpful for like having things going back and forth like that? That's going to make it easier for all of us then. And then would it be helpful, because he was saying it's going to do type checking. Can we include the resource type in the browser? Is that crazy?
I think it's more the other way around. Like, resource is an Angular thing of like how you define, like how an application can tell Angular that it's waiting on something asynchronous and what state that fetches in. So the resource kind of transitions from like, I have nothing to do to like, I have a request that's pending to like, I got a response or I got an error. And then it communicates that state to the framework in signals in a way where Angular can then like decide kind of what to show. But the resource today works on a loader, and the loader function returns a promise. So it's do a fetch, wait for that to resolve, get a value back. And that's great, but there are some kinds of requests where you want to have multiple values. And so I have a prototype of resource actually that is using async iterable under the hood instead of promise to be able to get multiple values back. But async iterables are not the easiest things to write. You write them with async generators, and like that, I have to go to MDN and look at how to do that every time I try to write one. So observable seems like a kind of a more natural thing there. And that kind of like hints at another topic I think you asked about, Dominic, which is the abort signal. And I think on our end, like abort signal is the way to go as far as cancellation, because it is at least the best chance we have on the web of having a cohesive story across more than one API of how to abort things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for simple examples, it feels clunky because it's like, I have to create this controller before the observable and then pass in the signal and
not the most for sure.
Yeah, and so the reason for that is like, if the observable synchronously produces values while you're subscribing to it, like in the middle of the subscribe call, you don't have a way of aborting your subscription unless you have a controller that was established before the subscription. And so but that's not a really common case. And so the idea is maybe we could have the unsubscribe function that like works in all the cases except for the one where your observable synchronously spits out a bunch of values. And maybe we could have both. But anyways, I'm also agreed in agreement with the abort controller being standard way. It seems fine.
So I think like this kind of leads us to two interesting conversations. One is and this is just like pure API design, so like just I'll throw it out there. But like cancel was kind of like abort controllers, like cancellation was like almost felt like, oh, I want to cancel, like kill the producer, kind of like translating it to like, oh, it's kind of, I'm kind of backing off from listening. It's kind of a slightly mind twisting. But like again, like this is API design. The second, I guess we are thinking about the same, which is like
Well, I wanted to mention one thing too, which is abort controller looks really clunky in examples because you're kind of showing the full spectrum of like making the abort controller, passing the signal through, like doing the cancellation, subscribing to the abort event, which would be funny to subscribe with an observable because it's technically event target. But we have this kind of like rule of thumb in Angular and in most frameworks that use RxJS, right? Like you don't ever subscribe manually, or you try very hard to avoid this and you let the framework do it for you. And so in most cases, you as a user won't feel the abort controller overhead boilerplate because the framework is bringing the abort controller. That's what resource does. It it makes an abort controller under the hood, and like you get the abort signal as long as you plumb that through to whatever you're doing on the back end.
Right.
It's fine. And so it's actually really ideal for the observable spec because you give us an observable in resource, a standard one, we will subscribe with our abort signal. And then the user doesn't even have to think about cancellation, right? It's kind of the same promise of RxJS, which is not as convenient with promises because the abort controller kind of has to be plumbed through there.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Kind of just tangential, I think what Pawel was thinking about there too, are there plans to integrate standard observable with for await and async iterable? Like, will it be an async iterable?
That's a good question. There's an issue filed about this And I think the concern was we would have to, like, what's the queuing strategy? Like if it starts emitting a bunch of values before you subscribe, does the observable just hold on to them forever? Or do we let the user pass in some sort of queuing strategy signal to say like, oh, drop values until I subscribe, or actually no, queue them all on an unbounded way. So I think initially, like right off the bat, probably not, just because I don't think it's a blocker for the API to ship, and we haven't decided on that yet. I think Ben is interested in doing that though. Like RxJS, I believe he made RxJS observables async iterable, and I'm pretty sympathetic to doing that in the platform, but I want to make sure I understand the ramifications of doing that in the native API before just doing it.
Yeah. Like adding a queuing behavior, right, from the user is almost like a manual conversion to async iterable, with like you pass some behavior in at that point.
Yeah.
One of the challenges that we saw with, I tried to play with Ben's implementation, using it through a streaming resource through the async iterable interface, and the problem that comes up is for await has no ability to pass an abort signal into the subscription that it makes. Which makes the abort case like quite, there's an edge case where like you're still stuck waiting on a promise until something actually resolves.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if this impacts that case a whole lot, but like we actually hope that the abort controller won't need to be used a lot, because we have a few terminating operators like take until, and the things like I think first or once or whatever, some things that basically specify that this observable stream should be torn down like on its own.
Yeah.
Like one quick example I'll just share really fast is this one, right? This is like a really, really simple toy example where, this gives you an unbounded stream, like a lazy unbounded stream of mouse move events. And we want to take all of them until this unbounded stream of mouse up events fires its first one. And this is like a self-terminating set, like an observable that listens to two events, first mouse move and then mouse up. And both of them tear themselves down and get unsubscribed to without you ever having to actually call abort or do anything like that, because take until knows how to tear things down itself. And so I don't know, I'm hoping like that kind of pattern can be useful enough to where, whatever issues abort controller, passing a signal in to observables will kind of be mitigated with the self-terminating streams. But so I don't know if that totally relates to like the 408 case, but I think it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think the observables that we deal with are more like one-off data fetches, right? Like fire an HTTP request and it's going to come back at some point. Maybe it returns multiple values because you're streaming responses, but you have some higher logic that's like, the component got destroyed, so like cancel everything that's currently pending. But I think like the take until is a good call out, because we could, if it were standard, we could wrap that at least.